What's up, guys? Let's take a look at another CodeWars exercise. I thought this one was cute, and even though it's just a level 7, there's a lot to think about and a lot to learn. The title is Mumbling, and no description, no backstory, no lore. It just gets straight to the examples. Our function is going to take a string and return a string based on a few things. The letters from the original will appear in the result in the same order, but the position determines how many. So this fourth guy will be repeated 4 times, and the sixth guy and seventh will be 6 and 7, and so on. There's a little bit of capital at the beginning, there's a little bit of dash between, and we'll figure out how to do those as we go. I want to start writing, what we call the procedural code, where you just say what you might do in order, and then I'm going to rearrange it a little bit to something that's a little more expressive, the way I like, where you say what matters instead of just what you happen to do first. I want to start with a for loop, even though we might not end with a for loop. It's a good place to get your ideas down. So I'm going to say for char and s. And char means character. It's just a classic abbreviation. I think in this case, yeah, we're guaranteed to get only letters, so we could say letter, but hey, this is less typing. So what happens? Each char gets turned into a chunk in the result, like this C turns into the triple C, and this A turns into the triple A, or whatever. I'm going to call that a word, but you can call it what you like. Everyone is exactly one upper, so that's constant. I'm going to say char.upper, and everyone has a variable amount of lowers. There's a 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So we're going to go lower times something. And what is that something? Well, we don't have it. We got to add it to the situation. The 0, 1, 2 that I mentioned is our classic index. It's the range, but we don't have a range. And I don't want to add one because I want to keep this char loop. I've already used it twice in this line, and I might want to use it again. So whenever you need both, you need the thing and the index. You need what and where. That's a good shot for our old friend enumerate. Enumerate gives you a tuple with the index and the item, just so we would need right here. So we have an I to put in that spot. Finally, we can't return. We have to collect all of these before we're done, so we have to put them in some kind of grouping, and I'm going to go with a list, and I'll show you why in a minute. So first we got to create the list, and then we have the only thing yet to be addressed, the dashes or the hyphens. We could just put one after each guy and just say, oh, plus the hyphen, and then that would have a problem at the end where we'd have to remove the last one because we only want it to connect between but not on the outside, and that would be annoying. That's the kind of thing that makes sense when you write it, but then when somebody else looks at it, they're like, what's going on? Why did we remove the last character? And they have to trace back your steps. So instead of that, we're going to use a method that's really useful on a lot of these, which is .join. Join is exactly what we want here, the connections between things and not the left and right edges. So if we join words, that's it. All we have to do is return, and if I hit test, I'm pretty sure we'll get the green check mark, go ahead, and we could move on with our lives, but I want to change this in a few ways. First of all, as I said, I want to express the stuff that I care about in a certain order, and it's not this. Like, this is not important. In fact, you saw I didn't write this first, right? I did the char s thing, and then I had to go back and add enumerate later, because I didn't know until I got into the middle. And I had to go back and add this words thing, because I didn't know until I had gotten to the middle. And you wouldn't know if you were reading. Like, you're reading this and you're like, I have no idea what this is for. I'm going to have to wait in suspense until it finally pays off a couple lines later. I don't really like to say it that way. I like to say it in the way that says, here's the important thing, and then how and where and why. So luckily, to do that, we don't have to type anything at all. We just rearrange what we have. I'm going to put some stuff in here. This is the key block. This is the thing that's getting repeated multiple times, and I'm going to put that front and center in this join, and then I'm going to put this guy to describe how and when it happens, and then we can get rid of everything else. All this leftover is like starting an empty list, which doesn't matter because it's about to be full, and adding them one at a time, which doesn't matter because we kind of pretend as if we're adding them all at once. We want to do this in a single pass, a single expression, you know? So we can get rid of all that, and we have something that works just the same. We can hit test and move on with our lives. I still don't want to because this has another problem. It's way too long. I don't want to see this line cause me to scroll. I don't want to show this to somebody else and say, hang on, let me zoom out. So I want to think of a way to condense it into maybe shorter lines. First thing I thought was just hitting enter, maybe move that. And this does work because in Python, parentheses, let the interpreter know that this is a single expression. The line breaks are not going to mess it up. We are waiting for the parentheses to end before we treat it as a unit. So this way that I spaced it out follows a pattern that I've talked about a lot over the last couple weeks, which is I like to say, what do we do for one thing, and then how do we spread it over all of them? What is the process for one item, and then how do we apply it to all the items? It's like you drop a pat of butter on the toast before you slide it across. There's a different order than the classic for loop, but I like it, and I think it fits with the way I think. I also think it's easier to read, but if you don't like it, that's fine. We can rearrange. Another way that would be possible in some scenarios is to take off this part and name it as a function. We would have this process applied to the thing each time. And what's stopping me from doing that now is that there's not a good name for it. Okay, this is just a made-up example with arbitrary stuff, but if it were a real thing, if we were doing like register voter or, you know, price car or something, then we could give it a name and it would be very readable in the context of this expression. And so I stopped here, and this is what I submitted as a solution. But when I saw the other people's, I saw some really interesting things, including one that just blew me away. It was so nice. So let's check them out. The top one is pretty much exactly what we wrote, except shorter names. And hey, they chopped off 9 characters, but I really don't like the C. It's kind of mysterious. It's hard to know what that is unless you already know what's going on. This one, absolutely beautiful. It's like when you read a poem and you have this feeling in your mind where you're like, well, I feel like this, but there's also a bit of this, and I'm also worried about this, and then Shakespeare just says it in 4 words, you know? That's how I feel when I look at this line. It's lovely, and let's talk about how they got there. First of all, there's a title method, which does the thing that we were talking about, one upper, the rest lower. I should have known because that's a real thing. It's not just a trick for this exercise. All the time we have to capitalize the first letter of a word, and if you were going to write the Lord of the Rings, you'd do the T and the L, and well, maybe not the O. So that existed, and calling that method is a lot cleaner than calling one plus another separately. Then that introduces a problem, which is the I doesn't work the way it worked for me, because if you remember, I had 0 lowers on the first one. And if we use that here, we'd have 0 anything, and we would have an empty first one. So we could shift that by doing a +1, but that would lose some of the beauty. And this person solved it with a second parameter on enumerate, which tells it where to start counting. I had heard of that before, but I thought it was skipping the first few. Like if we start at 3, it just skips the first couple. But it actually goes through the whole list, and it starts the number at a different point. So you could say, hey, we're starting at 10 if you wanted to avoid single digits or something like that. And that's really nice. They solved their problem, and this has no brackets, no plus, none of the ugly stuff. And I think if you locked me in a room and told me to improve this, even after a week, I probably wouldn't be able to improve it very much because I think it's pretty much got it. Wonderful, you see the little highlight of my upvote. But let's scroll through a couple others and see how it went for the other people. This person, they ran into that problem that I mentioned where if you put a dash on the end of all of them, then you have to end up taking it off at the end, which is pretty ugly. And like I said, this one has a lot of brackets, a lot of parentheses, a lot of plus, and I don't think it looks very nice. It does the job, but I mean, come on, compare that to that and you'll see that some things, while they may be the same amount of characters, they may be the same amount of things happening, it's more about how does it read, how does it look, what's going on. So they skip the enumerate, and this might be the only one on this whole page that skips the enumerate, because when we scroll we'll see a lot of that. And they use it to index into the list, bump it up by 1, which is what I was talking about avoiding here, and then doing the dash, almost using them all except for the last one, that kind of thing. They did, however, use the title, which is nice. So here's one that did basically our first version, the thing I typed at the beginning before rearranging it, except again they have the problem with the dash and then having to not quite return your whole thing because your whole thing goes too far. This one, perfectly similar to what we did. They are going through the enumerate. They just used a single character name. This one uses, first of all, look at all those parentheses and brackets. That's too much, right? I don't want to see that. They use a method called capitalize, which I had to look up because I wasn't sure. Turns out capitalize capitalizes the first thing in a sentence, and title capitalizes the first one of every word, which in this case it doesn't matter the way that they're setting it up and the way that we set it up. You're doing one word at a time, so there are no later words that would be different anyway. I think this guy, it would matter for him, but the others do not. So here's one, pretty ugly in my opinion, with lots of brackets and lots of abbreviations, but it absolutely does the job. This is more like what you might see in, C or some other programming language without the finer things that we have in Python. And if we continue to scroll, we'll see a few differences, like, oh, they use strip to peel off the last one instead of indexing up to that. I don't know if it makes a difference in performance. It might be a tiny bit faster. I think, by the way, when you do that, when you do this, it makes a copy, it makes another string, which in this case is fine, it's just a couple characters, but if it was a huge one, that could take up more memory, that could do a little bit of a hit to our performance. Anyway, we could see differences, but I wanted to show this because I really loved this one. I thought it was like going the extra mile and really chiseling every little bit out of that marble to get the perfect statue of David at the end. There you go.